wildlings serve crueler gods than you or I. Those boys are Craster's offerings.
Today I have a very interesting theory for what might be going on with Craster's sons in the books. Just to set a bit of context, in the television show we saw the others take the babies and take them to the far north, go to some weird altar and poke them in the face to turn them into other babies. What the implications of that are exactly, I'm not really sure because the show didn't really go into much more detail than that, other than we can assume the babies are being turned into others. I think it's very likely going to play out a little differently in the books, even though it's probably a similar concept, right? Like they're taking it and translating it for television, rather than going into deeper detail explaining the way George is going to actually do it in the books. They just did a nice visual representation so that it would be a big dramatic final scene for an episode. Sort of like how I theorize that the way we saw the others created with the guy strapped up to a tree and then stabbed with an obsidian dagger could be similar to the way that they're created in the show, but maybe not exactly, like they do it for a dramatic television version of it, rather than explaining like the consciousness magic and how the bodies are linked up to the weirwoods and how it's a big hive mind, right? All of these things that George is hinting at and going into in the books that they had to sort of leave out of the television show because you weren't in the characters' heads. So now back to Craster and his sons, what he does with them is obviously he leaves them out in the woods as some sort of agreement with the others, who then take them. And in the books we don't see where they're taken, but we do know that basically the same thing is going on in terms of the trade of male babies for what seems like protection. Also, in A Storm of Swords, one of Craster's oldest wives refers to the others as the boy's brothers, or Craster's sons. So yes, in the books as well, it seems that Craster's sons are being used to create others. So I'd like to try to explain exactly how that is done, and who is doing it. And I have two potential options that I think are pretty interesting. So I think roughly what's being done with Craster's sons is the same thing that's being done with Craster's daughters, it's just a female figure who is doing it. She is a Night's Queen-like figure who I believe is taking this male life force and potentially birthing weirwood shadows with it. If you've seen the last video I put out on the channel, this will make sense, and if you haven't, here's a quick recap. You know how I mentioned that guy strapped up to the tree to create the others? You take that and combine it with the magic that is done with Mel and Stannis to birth shadow babies, and if that guy who is strapped up to the trees is like the Green Seers, where it is a merged hive mind type thing with the weirwoods, basically you are birthing weirwood shadow babies, and they could be immortal, essentially undying shadows because the bodies that are strapped up to the weirwoods are sustained by the weirwoods. We see this down in Bloodraven's cave, so to me this all just tracks pretty well, that combining these multiple established pieces of magic, both people strapped to weirwoods and shadow baby magic, you could have these weirwood shadows. So hopefully you're starting to piece together then how when Melisandre says that the recipe for shadows is male and female coming together, well, basically, if you have a female Night's Queen type figure who is a Shadowbinder, she's getting all of these male life forces as sacrifices that she can potentially strap up to some trees in some creepy weirwood grove in the north and be doing a reverse Craster. And let's remember, Craster has been doing this for a long time, and many of his sons at this point would be definitely old enough to have been pumping out others for quite a while. And while we may not have a firm idea of exactly when the others started showing up again, it would sort of seem to line up that if they were becoming much more numerous around the time that Craster's sons were old enough for this process to begin, that would kind of line up with how long things seem to have been going on, where Mance is just now gathering all of the clans together to get away from the others. It seems like maybe they've been coming back roughly that recently. So yes, I do think there's a decent chance that Craster's sons are being strapped up to weirwoods and used as a male life force to birth the shadows that we see. One of the things that is interesting about the prologue is how the shadows that emerge, that are the others that eventually kill Waymar Royce, they're described as shadows, twins to the first. So this would definitely imply that they could have been cast from the same source if they're actually shadows, because Stannis' shadow was a shadow of Stannis Baratheon. So if all of these shadows are twins, well then they're probably all cast from the same source, one of Craster's sons. Or, potentially the Night King or any of the other bodies that have at any point been strapped up into this weirwood system and used for this type of magic. So with all of this stuff seeming to line up so nicely, that brings up the question, who is the female that is casting these shadows? Who is the icy version of Melisandre, a shadowbinder who is out there strapping these sacrificed boys to weirwoods and then birthing shadows with them? Now, our first option is someone who featured heavily in our last video, and I promised we would talk about her again soon. That is, of course, the Night's Queen. Now, last time we talked about the Night's Queen in the context of her potentially being sustained alive strapped to a weirwood at the Night Fort, because that seems like where the Night's King may potentially be. Also, in the House of the Undying, which I mentioned is mirrored in many ways to the Night Fort, there's a lot of little parallels that you can draw, like rats in the walls, this hall that is awash in gloom with these undying shadows strapped around a corrupt, still-beating heart, could mirror the way that in the Night Fort potentially there are these bodies who are unable to die being used to cast shadows who are strapped around a corrupted heart tree. And when Daenerys sits down at the table with them, the one to her right could be the potential Night King. He's a wizened old figure who is sitting there unable to move, staring across the table at someone who could be his queen, right? There's a male and female figure strapped around this heart, unable to move, together. So therefore that could imply that the Night's Queen maybe was also strapped up to this heart tree, if you're wanting to compare the symbolism. But with how we speculate this magic is done, you only really need the male figure to be strapped up to the tree, so therefore if the Night's Queen herself is also strapped to this tree, it was probably done as a punishment, sort of foreshadowed by maybe the 79 Sentinels, who were shoved into the wall as a punishment. Maybe when they defeated the Night's King, they took the Night's Queen as well and strapped them all up to the tree and trapped them there forever. At least that was the idea we covered last episode. Today, we're going to talk about what if she escaped, and what if she, like Melisandre, is not mortal, and therefore could still be out there sustained by her magic. And that, of course, would make her the perfect example of someone who could be out there doing the reverse Craster. She could be the one who is getting all of these babies, and with everything that we've just discussed, how she was tied to the Night's King, how she may have been birthing others originally, she seems like the perfect candidate if she is again Melisandre's icy, non-mortal counterpart. Now, the implications of the Night's Queen still being out there and doing a reverse Craster to increase the number of the others out there so that they can come back now is a very interesting topic, and I'd love to hear any thoughts that inspires down in the comments. Now, there's not too much that we know about the Night's Queen that I haven't already covered, so I would just say that basically given everything that we do know, this would line up pretty well if she was in fact revealed to be still out there. But I do have a slightly more dark horse candidate for who could be out there producing these others. Someone who we've heard a little bit more about, and someone who's a little bit more related to characters in our present story. That is none other than Shiera Seastar. Now, this one is definitely much more speculative, but again, we do have Bloodraven, who is directly related to Shiera Seastar, who is sitting up there north of the wall. And when you sort of try to piece all of this together and you take a look at some of the details we are given about Shiera Seastar, well, a few things start to become pretty interesting. First of all, there's obviously her connection to Bloodraven, and she is suspected to have used sorcery to aid him when he was Hand of the King. It is also said that she is rumored to bathe in blood to maintain her youth. So we have both the fact that she is interested in magic, preserving her life and youth, and very specifically seems to be involved in blood magic to do just that. That could lead to a situation where she ends up, potentially with a longer preserved life, in some sort of situation like a Melisandre or the Night's Queen potentially were. And if her half-brother Bloodraven, who she has aided with her sorceries in the past apparently, is actually working towards this cycle of rebirth in some way or another, which we have talked about, right? Because Bloodraven and or time-traveling Bran are so powerful, it would seem very likely that if they were really trying to stop this with all of the power that they have, they could have done something better. But instead, all of the time that Bloodraven has been up there strapped to the tree, the others have been growing stronger. So if Shiera Seastar is out there aiding him in that, this could potentially all be part of their plan. And if you're looking for any further symbolism, one of the things that we've talked about is the idea of the magic being corrupted, going from green magic to these other branches of magic that all involve blood magic. But if you look at Shiera Seastar's eyes, what color are they? One is blue, like the icy magic that she may be using, and the other is bright green. potentially, maybe, implying some sort of part that she has to play in this transition back to green magic from ice magic. Who really knows? That might be a bit of a stretch, but again, George likes to hide these tiny little clues that they're hidden in such a way where basically you can never actually be like, ah yes, I think that Shiera Seastar has a role to play in the rebirth of green magic because her eyes are mismatched. That sounds crazy, but at the same time, in hindsight, if she helps restore green magic into the world and was using ice magic, you would look at her eyes and be like, oh hey, what do you know? So, it's one of those things. Is the theory, stronger based on it? No. But is it interesting? Kinda. And while we're on the subject of eyes, there is also the fact that the Night's Queen supposedly had eyes like blue stars, and if you wanted to draw some sort of reference to that, well, what better name than Shiera Seastar? Because the sea is blue, and stars, and, sea star. So again, Shiera Seastar is much less firmly established as someone who would be capable of birthing these shadow babies, or doing all of this ice magic, but, again, Bloodraven wasn't really well set up to be a secret tree man when we were hearing all the details about his previous life either. Also, just as a bit of a note, Shiera Seastar is one of the few people in the story who is confirmed to have banged a Greenseer, so another point to the potential of Shiera Seastar in this situation. But again, as I said, it is all pretty speculative stuff, and I would say it is more likely that if there is a reverse Craster going on, it would be being done by the OG Night's Queen, but also thematically in a lot of ways, it might be more interesting for our characters if it was Shiera Seastar doing it. Also, just before we go, I do want to mention that I definitely do remember from watching people play through the Telltale Game of Thrones game, that there was this one point, spoilers for the game, there was this one point where you find these people in a creepy weirwood grove in the far north, and it's this entire little community all being controlled by one super magic powerful warg lady, basically. And again, the idea of some creepy weirwood grove in the far north that is controlled by some super powerful magic woman is, sort of in line with what we're talking about here. I don't know if that is a piece of evidence that anyone really cares about, given that it was a Telltale game, but the idea is at least, something that's being explored. So let me know what you think of that whole idea down in the comments. Do you think that the male life forces of Craster's sons are being used for a reverse Craster by some sort of crazy icy woman like the Night's Queen or some modern equivalent? Let me know what you think, and make sure to like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I'll be back with something else very soon.